self-proclaimed billionaire. Emma Thorne sat in a chic bakery, expecting a successful blind date. Instead, a tired, flour-dusted single dad, Flynn Carter, stumbled in, explaining his sick brother sent him. His daughter's photo stirred Emma's frozen heart, but his humble bakery job and overdue rent shattered her facade of control. As rain poured, their broken bicycle and a landlord's cruel threat revealed Flynn's desperate reality, forcing Emma to confront her past and the true cost of her own success. Emma Thorne, CEO of Thorne Tech, a woman who commanded boardrooms with an icy gaze and built an empire from sheer will, sat in the corner of the small bakery. She studied the photo on her phone, a picture Olivia had shown her last week over coffee. It was a man in a polished navy suit, a confident smile, someone whose life seemed meticulously curated for success. Emma, by contrast, existed in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a monument to her own relentless drive. Yet, for 3 years, ever since the car accident that stole her younger sister, her heart had remained a frozen landscape, untouched by joy or connection. Olivia, her persistent friend, was the only one who still tried to pull her back into the world. And this blind date was her latest, perhaps most desperate, attempt. The bell above the bakery door jingled, and a different man walked in. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt that smelled faintly of butter and had flour streaked across one sleeve. His eyes were tired, etched with a weariness Emma recognized in her own late-night reflections, though for vastly different reasons. He dropped into the seat across from her, his movements unhurried, almost resigned. "I'm sorry," Flynn Carter said, his voice rougher than she expected, as if he rarely used it for pleasantries. "My brother Rowan was supposed to be here. He got sick this morning. My mother called and said I had to come instead." Emma studied him, a flicker of something she couldn't name stirring within her. He did not want to be here, that much was obvious. Yet, there was a quiet strength in the way he held himself, like a man accustomed to carrying heavy burdens, though he had never quite accepted their weight. "You didn't have to," Emma said, her tone devoid of the usual corporate polish. Flynn looked down at his calloused hands, scarred by dough and ovens. "Family pressure. Rowan helped me out when my daughter got sick last year. I owed him." "Daughter?" Emma had not expected that. The information felt like a pebble dropped into the still waters of her carefully constructed calm. "How old is she?" "4," Flynn said, a hint of softness entering his tired voice. "Her name's Sophie." He pulled out his phone. The screen cracked in one corner and showed Emma a picture. A little girl with bright, mischievous eyes and a gap-toothed smile, clutching a stuffed rabbit as if it were her most prized possession. Emma felt an unexpected tightening in her chest, a physical sensation she hadn't experienced in years. "She's beautiful," Emma said, the words surprisingly sincere. Flynn's expression softened, the weariness momentarily receding. "She's everything." They sat in silence for a moment, the bustling world outside the bakery window a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy that had unexpectedly settled between them. People walked past, their lives moving forward, while Emma felt stuck in place, a prisoner of her past. But sitting here, across from this stranger who clearly did not belong in her meticulously ordered world, she felt something shift. Not much, just enough to notice. "So, you work here?" Emma asked, glancing around the small, cozy bakery named Sweet Corner. The air was warm, fragrant with cinnamon and yeast. Flynn nodded. "Yeah, I make the pastries. Started 3 years ago when I needed something stable for Sophie." "Where's her mother?" Emma asked, then immediately regretted the abruptness of her question. "Sorry, that's too personal." Flynn shook his head. "It's fine. She left when Sophie was 6 months old. Haven't heard from her since." He said it like a simple fact, devoid of overt emotion. But Emma recognized that kind of practiced control. She used it herself whenever people probed about her sister, a carefully constructed shield against deeper pain. "That must be hard," Emma said, a rare note of empathy in her voice. Flynn shrugged, a gesture of resignation. "You do what you have to do." Emma found herself leaning forward, a strange hunger for connection she hadn't known she possessed. "What is Sophie like?" Flynn blinked, surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked him about his daughter with genuine interest. Then his face lit up in a way that made him look years younger, transforming his tired features. "Coloring books. She's obsessed with them, and she loves helping me bake. Well, she mostly just eats the dough, but she thinks she's helping." Emma smiled. Truly, genuinely smiled. She could not remember the last time that had happened naturally, without conscious effort or professional obligation. "She sounds wonderful," Emma said. Flynn looked at her, as if trying to discern if she actually meant it, before he could respond. His phone rang, its cheap plastic vibrating against the worn tabletop. He glanced at the screen, and his whole body tensed, the warmth fading from his eyes. "Sorry, I have to take this," Flynn said. He answered, his voice softening once more. "Hey, sweetheart." A small, anxious voice came through the speaker, loud enough for Emma to hear. "Daddy, I'm hungry. When are you coming?" Flynn checked his watch, a worn, utilitarian timepiece. "I'm sorry, baby. I'll be there in 10 minutes. "It's okay," Sophie said, her voice small, a tiny thread of sadness woven through it. Flynn hung up and stood quickly. "I'm really sorry. I have to go pick her up from daycare. I didn't realize how late it was." Emma stood too. Every logical fiber in her being screamed at her to let him go, to end this bizarre, accidental encounter. This whole thing had been a mistake from the start, she told herself. Wrong person, wrong circumstances. But her mouth moved before her brain could stop it, defying all logic and self-preservation. "Do you have 20 more minutes?" Emma asked, the question hanging in the air. "I'd like to meet your daughter." Flynn froze, his tired eyes searching her face, trying to work out if this was real or some strange test. He looked like a man who had learned not to trust unexpected kindness. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," Flynn said. "Yeah, okay." They walked 3 blocks through the city's afternoon bustle, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the bakery. The daycare was a small, brightly painted building tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store. Flynn signed Sophie out while Emma waited by the door, observing the joyful chaos of children being reunited with their parents. When the little girl came running out, she launched herself into Flynn's arms with such force he stumbled back a step. "Daddy!" Sophie cried, her voice bright with unadulterated joy. "I missed you so much." Flynn caught her, holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I missed you, too, sweetheart." Sophie pulled back. Her bright eyes, identical to the ones in the photo, landed on Emma, full of an innocent curiosity. "Who's that?" Flynn sat Sophie down and knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is Emma. She's a friend." Sophie, fearless and open-hearted, walked up to Emma and looked up at her with those same bright eyes. "Hi, I'm Sophie." Emma crouched down, meeting the child at eye level. "Hi, Sophie. It's nice to meet you." "Do you like coloring?" Sophie asked, a serious expression on her small face. Emma laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar even to her own ears. "I used to when I was younger." "I can teach you," Sophie said, full of earnest conviction. "I'm really good at staying in the lines." Flynn cleared his throat, a subtle warning. "Sophie, we should probably let Emma get back to her day." But Emma shook her head, an insistent spark igniting within her. "Actually, I'm free. Would you two like to get something to eat?" Flynn looked uncertain, his gaze flickering from Sophie's eager face to Emma's composed one. Emma could almost see him calculating, weighing risks she did not yet understand, the burdens of his life shadowing his eyes. But Sophie grabbed Emma's hand with both of hers, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Can we go to the bakery?" Sophie asked, her voice a hopeful whisper. "Daddy makes the best apple pie." Emma looked at Flynn, a silent question passing between them. Permission. Maybe. Or surrender. "Okay," Flynn said quietly, a faint smile touching his lips. The bakery. They walked back to Sweet Corner together, Sophie holding Emma's hand the whole way. The little girl chattered ceaselessly about her day at school, about her stuffed rabbit, about how she wanted to learn to make cookies just like her daddy. Emma listened to every word, absorbing the simple, unconditional joy that radiated from Sophie, and the tightness in her chest from earlier began to ease, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar warmth. Inside the bakery, Flynn cut 3 generous slices of apple pie and brought them to a corner table, a small island of warmth amidst the late afternoon quiet. Sophie sat between them, swinging her legs, taking huge, enthusiastic bites that left crumbs all over her shirt. Flynn tried to wipe them off, but Sophie squirmed away, giggling, delighted by the game. "So," Emma said to Sophie, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" Sophie thought hard, her small face scrunched in concentration. "A baker, like Daddy." Flynn smiled, a look of profound love softening his features, and ruffled her hair. "You can be anything you want, sweetheart, but I want to be like you," Sophie said simply, her gaze fixed on her father. Emma watched Flynn's face soften with a love so complete, so pure, it almost hurt to witness. She thought about her sister, about all the moments they would never have, about the empty penthouse waiting for her, a cold, echoing space devoid of laughter. She thought about 3 years of going through the motions instead of truly living. When they finished eating, Emma stood, a decision forming in her mind. "I should drive you 2 home. It's getting late." Flynn started to protest, a flicker of that familiar pride in his eyes. But Emma held up a hand. "Please, I want to." They walked to Emma's car, a sleek black sedan parked 2 blocks away, a stark symbol of her wealth. Sophie's eyes went wide when she saw it. "Wow," Sophie breathed, her voice filled with awe. "It's so shiny." Emma opened the back door and helped Sophie into the car seat Flynn had brought from wherever he usually kept it. Flynn gave her his address, a tired sigh escaping his lips, and Emma drove through the city as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They pulled up to a rundown apartment building with peeling paint and a broken front gate, a sharp contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers of Emma's world. Flynn got out quickly, clearly embarrassed, his body rigid with discomfort. "Thank you for the ride," Flynn said, not quite meeting her eyes. "We'll be fine now." But Sophie, ever perceptive, grabbed Emma's hand before she could drive away, her small fingers surprisingly firm. "Will you come visit us? Please." Emma looked at Flynn. He stood on the sidewalk, backlit by the fading light, holding his daughter's backpack, looking tired and uncertain, and nothing like what Emma thought she wanted in a partner. Yet, he also looked undeniably real, in a way no one in her life had been for a long, long time. "I'd like that," Emma said softly, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Sophie beamed, a spark of pure happiness in her eyes. Flynn just nodded, something unreadable in his gaze, a mix of gratitude, confusion, and perhaps a flicker of hope. Emma drove home through the city's growing traffic, her hand steady on the wheel, but her heart beating with an unfamiliar rhythm. When she reached her penthouse, she stood at the window, looking out at the glittering city lights, a vast, impersonal expanse. Her phone sat on the counter. Olivia's contact pulled up, a silent invitation to confide. She should call and tell her the date had been a disaster, a complete mismatch. But Emma did not pick up the phone. Instead, she thought about a little girl who wanted to teach her how to color, about a father who loved his daughter more than anything, about how her own heart had beaten faster for the first time in 3 years. Across the city, in his small, cramped apartment, Flynn stood after putting Sophie to bed. The rent was 3 months overdue, a constant, gnawing anxiety. His ex-wife had left them with nothing but debt, a bitter legacy. He worked every shift he could get, his hands aching, just to keep Sophie fed and clothed. Emma lived in a different world, a world of wealth and power and possibilities he could not even begin to imagine. She had been kind today, but kindness, he had learned already, faded when the harsh realities of life set in. Flynn went to the window, looking out at the city skyline in the distance, a glittering, unattainable dream, somewhere out there. Emma was probably already forgetting about them. "Don't dream," Flynn whispered to himself, the words a quiet, painful mantra. "She's not for you." But in her penthouse across the city, Emma stood at her own window, still feeling the warmth of Sophie's small hand in hers, a tangible connection across the urban divide. "Why is my heart beating like this?" Emma whispered to the empty room, her voice a bewildered question. Neither of them had an answer, but both of them knew something had irrevocably changed. Emma told herself she wasn't looking for them. The supermarket on 5th Street was simply closer to her office than her usual gourmet food store. The fact that it was 2 blocks from Flynn's apartment was, she insisted, a mere coincidence. She pushed her cart down the cereal aisle, the fluorescent lights gleaming. And there they were. Sophie stood on tiptoe, her small hand reaching for a box of generic brand flakes, while Flynn checked prices on his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Emma watched them for a moment, a pang of something akin to tenderness echoing in her chest, before Sophie spotted her. "Emma!" The little girl's voice was a joyous shout, and she immediately ran over, wrapping her arms around Emma's legs, a spontaneous, unreserved hug. "Did you come to see us?" Flynn looked up sharply, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder to read, a defensive shield falling into place. "Sophie, let go, Emma's busy." But Emma crouched down to Sophie's level, her earlier unease momentarily forgotten. "Hi, sweetheart, shopping with Daddy." Sophie nodded enthusiastically, her eyes bright. "We're getting cereal and bread and peanut butter. Daddy says we can't get cookies this week." The innocence of her statement highlighted the stark reality of Flynn's struggles. Flynn moved closer, his jaw tight, his discomfort palpable. "We should let Emma finish her shopping." Emma stood, meeting his eyes. Something defensive had clearly settled there since their drive home 3 days ago, a renewed awareness of their differing worlds. "It's good to see you both." "Right," Flynn said, his voice flat. He took Sophie's hand, his grip firm. "Come on, baby. We need to go." They left quickly, Flynn practically pulling Sophie away, a desperate urgency in his movements. Emma stood alone in the cereal aisle, holding her empty cart, feeling like she had done something wrong, though she couldn't articulate what it was. 2 days later, Emma stopped by Sweet Corner during her lunch break. She told herself she was craving their apple pie. A flimsy excuse. Flynn stood behind the counter, his broad shoulders tensed as he arranged fresh pastries, the delicate aroma filling the air. When he saw her, his posture became rigid. "What can I get you?" Flynn asked, his voice professionally distant, a wall erected between them. "Just coffee," Emma said, her gaze lingering on his tired eyes. "And whatever you recommend." Flynn grabbed a blueberry muffin, avoiding her gaze, and placed it on the counter. "On the house." "I can pay," Emma said, a slight edge to her voice. "I know you can," Flynn said quietly, his eyes finally meeting hers, a silent challenge in their depths. "But you don't have to." Emma wanted to ask what she had done wrong, why he was acting like she was dangerous. But other customers lined up behind her, and Flynn's attention shifted away, a convenient escape. She sat in the corner, eating her muffin alone, watching Flynn work. He moved with practiced efficiency, smiling at customers, boxing up pastries, never once looking her way. That evening, Emma called Olivia. "So, how did the date go?" Olivia asked, her voice laced with thinly veiled anticipation. "You never called me back." "It was fine," Emma said, looking out at the city lights from her penthouse. "Different than expected." "Different? How?" Olivia pressed, sensing the hesitation in Emma's voice. Emma thought about Sophie's small hand in hers, about Flynn's tired eyes, about the way her heart had unexpectedly responded to something she could not yet name. His brother didn't show up. He sent Flynn instead. "Flynn?" Olivia's voice rose in surprise. "Wait, Rowan has a brother." "Apparently," Emma said, a dry note in her tone, "with a daughter." Olivia went silent for a moment, processing the unexpected information. "Emma, I set you up with Rowan because he's stable, successful. If there's a brother with a kid, that's complicated." "I know," Emma said, the word a weary sigh. "So, you're not going to see him again?" Olivia asked, a hint of disappointment in her voice. Emma did not answer. She could not explain that she had already seen Flynn twice more, that she kept finding reasons to be near him, even though he clearly wanted distance, a chasm of unspoken emotions separating them. "Emma," Olivia said gently, sensing her friend's internal struggle. "Just be careful. Okay, I don't want you getting hurt." After they hung up, Emma sat in the dark, the city lights a distant, indifferent glow, wondering why she could not let this go. Flynn was right to keep his distance. She lived in a penthouse. He could barely afford rent. She ran a company worth millions. He made $8 an hour decorating cakes. It made no logical sense. But sense, Emma was learning, had nothing to do with how she truly felt. The rain came on a Thursday evening, a sudden, cold downpour that turned the city streets into glistening rivers. Emma left work late, driving through the downpour, her windshield wipers fighting a losing battle. She almost missed them. Just a glimpse through her rain-streaked windshield of two small figures huddled under the inadequate shelter of a supermarket awning. She pulled over, her expensive car a stark contrast to their desperate plight. Flynn and Sophie sat on the wet concrete, Sophie's small body shaking uncontrollably. Flynn had wrapped his thin jacket around her, but he wore only a thin t-shirt, soaked through to the skin. Their battered bicycle lay on its side nearby, the rear tire completely flat. Emma got out of her car and ran to them, the cold rain plastering her hair to her face. "Flynn, what happened?" Flynn looked up at her, water dripping from his hair, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. "Tire blew. We're waiting for it to slow down." Sophie's teeth chattered, her small lips a blue tint that made Emma's chest constrict with unexpected fear. "Get in the car," Emma said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. It was not a request. Flynn started to protest, his pride a fragile shield, but Sophie was already standing, her small arms reaching for Emma, a desperate plea in her eyes. "I'm cold," the little girl whimpered, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. Emma scooped Sophie up, not waiting for Flynn's permission, and carried her to the car, gently settling her into the back seat. She cranked the heat up to full blast and wrapped Sophie in the emergency blanket she kept in the trunk, a plush, comforting warmth against the child's shivering body. Flynn climbed into the passenger seat, his whole body rigid with something that looked like shame. His gaze fixed on the rain-streaked windshield. Emma drove without speaking. The only sound, the hum of the engine and the quiet whimper of Sophie gradually subsiding. When they reached the rundown apartment building, Flynn opened his door quickly, clearly embarrassed for her to see his reality. "Thank you," Flynn said, not looking at her, his voice devoid of emotion. "We'll be fine now." "You're soaked," Emma said, her voice insistent. "Both of you need to get warm." Flynn's hands clenched, his knuckles white against his jeans. "We can manage." "Daddy, I'm still cold," Sophie said from the back seat, her voice small and scared. A tiny crack in Flynn's carefully constructed composure. Something broke in Flynn's expression, a flicker of raw vulnerability. "Okay, come on, baby." He got Sophie out of the car, his movements slow and tired. Emma followed them up 3 flights of creaking stairs to a door with peeling paint, the faint smell of mildew permeating the air. Flynn fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably from cold and fatigue. Inside. The apartment was barely warmer than outside. Emma could see her own breath forming small clouds in the dim light. "Heater's broken," Flynn said flatly, his voice devoid of hope. "I called the landlord 2 days ago." He disappeared into what must be a bedroom and returned with dry clothes for Sophie. Emma, her heart aching, helped the little girl change while Flynn put on a dry shirt, his movements mechanical. When Sophie was warm and bundled in blankets on the worn couch, her shivering finally subsided. Flynn went to make tea, the clatter of mismatched mugs echoing in the small space. Emma looked around the apartment. It was tiny, barely bigger than her walk-in closet, but it was meticulously clean. Sophie's colorful drawings covered the refrigerator, a vibrant testament to a child's imagination. A small bookshelf held worn children's books, arranged by color. A silent attempt at order amidst chaos. Someone had clearly tried hard to make this place a home, a sanctuary against the harshness of their world. Flynn brought her tea in a chipped mug, the warmth a small comfort against the cold. "Thank you for helping us," Flynn said, his voice a low murmur, before Emma could respond. A thunderous pounding on the door startled them both. Flynn's whole body went rigid, his earlier exhaustion replaced by a tense alertness. He set down his mug and opened the door a crack. A heavy-set man in his 50s, his face red with anger, pushed past him, his bulky frame filling the doorway. "Flynn, we need to talk." Mr. Peterson, the landlord, bellowed, his voice booming in the small apartment. "Mr. Peterson, not now," Flynn said quietly, glancing protectively at Sophie, who had immediately shrunk into the couch, making herself as small as possible. Her eyes wide with fear, Emma recognized that instinct. The child had clearly seen this before, the familiar dance of fear and powerlessness. 3 months, Flynn. 3 months you've been dodging me." Mr. Peterson snarled, ignoring Flynn's plea. "I've got other tenants who pay on time. You think I run a charity?" Sophie's eyes went wide, tears welling up. She bit her lip, trying to stifle the sound. "I told you I'd have it by next week," Flynn said quietly, trying to position himself between the irate landlord and his terrified daughter. His voice strained with the effort to remain calm. "I picked up extra shifts." "You said that last month," Mr. Peterson barked, his face inches from Flynn's. "I want the money or you're out. Both of you. I don't care if it's raining." Sophie started to cry silently, large tears tracing paths down her small face. Flynn's hands shook, but his voice stayed steady, remarkably so. "Please," Flynn said, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Just give me until next Friday, I promise." Mr. Peterson jabbed a finger at Flynn's chest, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Next Friday, not 1 day later, or I'm changing the locks." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls and send a fresh wave of fear through the small apartment. The apartment fell into a terrible silence, broken only by Sophie's muffled sobs. Flynn stood frozen, his back to them, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Sophie buried her face in the blanket, her small shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Emma moved to the couch, her heart aching, and pulled Sophie into her arms. The little girl clung to her, crying into her shoulder, her small body trembling. Flynn finally turned around, and Emma saw his face. Defeat, humiliation, the look of a man who had been broken too many times, whose spirit was slowly being crushed by the relentless grind of poverty. "I'm sorry you had to see that." Flynn said, his voice hollow, devoid of its usual warmth. Emma held Sophie tighter, her own eyes stinging. "How much do you owe?" Flynn shook his head, refusing to meet her gaze. "It's not your problem. How much?" Emma asked again, her voice gentle but firm. 4,200, Flynn said quietly. 3 months at 1,400 each. Emma did the math in her head. $4,200, an amount that would not even cover her monthly parking spot in her luxury building. But to Flynn, it was everything. The insurmountable barrier between his daughter and homelessness. "I should go," Emma said gently, easing Sophie back onto the couch, her small body still trembling. Flynn nodded, his eyes fixed on the worn floor, not meeting hers. Emma left without another word, her heart heavy, the image of Flynn's humiliated face seared into her memory. The next morning, before the city had fully woken, Emma drove to the apartment building. She found Mr. Peterson in the building office, his face already set in a familiar scowl, and without hesitation, she wrote him a check for $8,400. "What's this?" Mr. Peterson asked, looking at the check suspiciously, his eyes widening as he saw the amount. "Payment for Flynn's apartment," Emma said, her voice calm and authoritative. 6 months paid in full. "You will not contact him about rent until March. Do we have an understanding?" Mr. Peterson's eyes widened further, a flicker of surprise and grudging respect entering his gaze. "Who are you?" "Someone who pays their debts," Emma said. She left before he could ask more questions, the silence of her departure more powerful than any explanation. At noon, Flynn called her, his voice shaking with a mixture of shock and anger. "What did you do?" Flynn asked. Emma sat at her desk, looking out at the city, a tangible representation of her own power. What needed to be done? "I can't accept this," Flynn said, his voice strained. "It's already done," Emma said quietly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Emma, that's 6 months of rent. Do you have any idea what that means to me?" Flynn's voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to," Emma said. "Why?" Flynn asked, the word barely a whisper, a desperate plea for understanding. "Why would you do this?" Emma closed her eyes, the image of Sophie's terrified face, of Flynn's humiliation, burning in her mind. "Because Sophie shouldn't have to be afraid in her own home, because you work 2 shifts a day and still can't get ahead, because someone should help you. Just once." Flynn made a sound like a sob caught in his throat, a raw expression of gratitude and overwhelm. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Emma said gently. "Just take care of Sophie after that." Emma appeared more often. She brought groceries and left them at the door, anonymous acts of kindness. She sent toys for Sophie through delivery services, bright spots of joy in their small apartment. She texted Flynn asking about his day. Small, tentative attempts at connection. Flynn responded, but his messages remained careful, filled with gratitude, yet still distant, like he was afraid to get too close, to break the fragile balance of their relationship. Sophie, however, had no such reservations. When Emma visited, the little girl attached herself to Emma's side, a small, warm shadow. She showed Emma every drawing, every new word she learned, every small triumph. And Emma soaked it up, starving for this connection she had not known she needed, a profound emotional hunger finally being sated. 2 weeks later, Emma picked Sophie up from daycare because Flynn had to work late, another extra shift to try and make ends meet. They went to the park, and Sophie, full of boundless energy, taught Emma how to pump her legs on the swings, her infectious laughter echoing through the autumn air. When Flynn arrived to get her, Sophie ran to him, launching herself into his arms, but immediately grabbed Emma's hand too, pulling them both together. "Can Emma stay for dinner?" Sophie asked, her voice a hopeful plea. "Please, Daddy." Flynn looked at Emma, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. She saw fear, maybe, or a dawning recognition of his own deepening feelings. "If she wants to," Flynn said carefully, his voice a low murmur. They made spaghetti together in the tiny kitchen, the small space filled with the comforting aroma of garlic and tomatoes. Sophie stood on a chair, giggling, helping Flynn stir the sauce, her small hands clumsy but enthusiastic. Emma set the table with mismatched plates, a simple, unpretentious act, and wondered when she had last felt this comfortable, this undeniably right, in any setting. Over dinner. Sophie chattered ceaselessly about her day, her small voice a constant source of joy. When she reached for her water, her elbow accidentally knocked the glass over. It shattered on the worn floor, the sound impossibly loud in the small apartment. Sophie froze, her face instantly going pale, her eyes wide with terror. "I'm sorry," Sophie whispered, her voice a choked sob. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Emma moved quickly, kneeling beside Sophie, her hands gentle on the child's trembling shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart, it was an accident. Things break." Sophie's eyes filled with fresh tears, the memory of past scoldings clear on her small face. "Mama used to get really mad when I broke things." Flynn's face went tight, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. He cleaned up the glass without speaking, his movements precise and careful. Emma held Sophie until the little girl stopped shaking, a silent comfort against the echoes of her past. Later, after Sophie was in bed, quiet once more, Flynn and Emma sat on the small couch, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. "Her mother had a temper," Flynn said quietly, his voice a low, painful confession. "Sophie doesn't remember much, but she remembers that." Emma turned to look at him, her heart aching for the child and the man. "You're nothing like that." "I know," Flynn said, his gaze fixed on the floor. "But sometimes I wonder if Sophie will always be afraid, if that damage is permanent." "She's getting better," Emma said, her voice firm with conviction. "She feels safe with you, and," she added softly, meeting his eyes, "with you." The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken emotions, a fragile connection finally being acknowledged. Flynn looked away first, that familiar wall of self-protection rising once more. "My brother called yesterday," Flynn said, his voice changing, a sudden hardness entering his tone. "He wanted to know if I was still seeing you." Emma went still, sensing the implicit threat. "What did you tell him?" "That we're friends," Flynn said, the word feeling inadequate. "He told me to be careful, that you were meant for him, not me, that I shouldn't ruin the family's opportunity." "Opportunity," Emma repeated, the word tasting bitter in her mouth. Flynn's hands clenched, his knuckles white. "He didn't mean it like that. My family, they just want better for us. Rowan's always been the successful one. Me showing up instead of him, spending time with you. It looks like I'm taking something that wasn't mine." Emma leaned closer, defying the invisible barriers he tried to erect. "What do you want?" "Flynn, not your brother, not your family. You." Flynn looked at her, and she saw everything he was holding back, want and fear and hope, all tangled together in a complex knot of emotion. "It doesn't matter what I want," Flynn said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes, it does," Emma said, her voice firm, unwavering. 3 days later. Emma waited outside Sophie's daycare. She had asked Flynn if she could pick Sophie up, and he had agreed. A small step forward in their tentative dance, when Sophie came running out. Her small arms flew around Emma's legs. "Mom! Emma!" Sophie cried, her voice bright with joy. "You came!" Emma's breath caught, the unexpected word hitting her chest like a physical blow. She looked up and saw Flynn standing frozen in the doorway, his face pale, his earlier tension replaced by a profound shock. After they dropped Sophie at a friend's house for a playdate. Flynn pulled Emma aside, his voice strained, raw with a mix of fear and anger. "She can't call you that." "Why not?" Emma asked, a tremor in her voice. "Because what happens when you leave?" Flynn's voice rose, edged with panic. "What happens when you realize this is too hard, too complicated? Sophie's already lost one mother. I won't let her lose another." Emma stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "Who says I'm leaving?" Flynn backed up, his body rigid with unspoken fears. "Emma, look at us. Look at this situation. You live in a penthouse. I live in a place where the landlord threatens to throw us out. You run a company. I decorate cakes. This doesn't work." "Why not?" Emma demanded, her voice firm. "Because you deserve better," Flynn said, his voice breaking. "Because I have nothing to offer you." Emma moved into his space, forcing him to meet her eyes, a silent challenge in her gaze. "You have everything I need." "You don't know what you're saying," Flynn said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma took his face in her hands, her touch gentle but firm. "If you'll let me, I want to become her mother and the woman of this family." Flynn stared at her, his defenses crumbling, his eyes searching hers for any hint of insincerity. "You're serious?" "Yes," Emma said, her voice a soft, unwavering promise. Flynn kissed her then. It was desperate and gentle, full of everything he had been holding back, years of pain and longing pouring out in that single, profound embrace. Emma kissed him back, wrapping her arms around him, feeling his heart pound against hers, a rhythm of rediscovered life. When they pulled apart, Flynn rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I'm terrified," Flynn whispered. "So am I," Emma whispered back, her own fear mingling with an intoxicating sense of hope, but neither of them let go. Flynn arrived at Sweet Corner before sunrise, like he did every morning, the familiar scent of yeast and sugar a comforting presence. He was pulling fresh croissants from the oven, their golden-brown surfaces glistening, when his brother Rowan walked through the back door. Rowan looked the same as always, impeccably pressed shirt, confident stride, the embodiment of the successful son their mother always held up as the example. "We need to talk," Rowan said, closing the door behind him, his voice clipped and impatient. Flynn sat down the baking tray, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm working." "About Emma," Rowan continued, ignoring Flynn's quiet defiance. "Mom saw pictures. You and her with your kid." Flynn's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "Her name is Sophie." Rowan stepped closer, his gaze hard. "You know she was meant for me. Right? Olivia set that whole thing up for me. You were just supposed to show up and apologize." "You didn't want to go," Flynn said quietly, the truth a bitter taste in his mouth. "You called in sick." "Because I was nervous." Rowan's voice rose, betraying a flicker of insecurity. "Not because I didn't want the opportunity. Do you have any idea what a connection like that could mean for our family? Mom's been talking about it for weeks. A tech CEO, someone with real money and influence." Flynn turned back to his cooling croissants, their perfect spirals a stark contrast to the ugliness of his brother's words. "Emma's not a business opportunity." "Maybe not to you," Rowan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you're stealing something that wasn't yours. You think you deserve her, a single dad living in that dump with a kid to feed. You can't even make rent on time." The words hit exactly where they were meant to, targeting Flynn's deepest insecurities. His hand stilled on the baking sheet, the warmth of the pastry fading beneath his fingers. "She's with me because she wants to be," Flynn said. But his voice lacked conviction, a ghost of doubt slipping through. Rowan laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Or because she feels sorry for you. Come on, Flynn, wake up. Women like Emma don't end up with guys like you unless there's pity involved." After Rowan left, the silence in the kitchen was heavy, punctuated only by the quiet ticking of the oven. Flynn stood alone, the croissants cooling on the counter, his phone in his pocket buzzing with 3 unread messages from Emma. All he could hear was his ex-wife's voice from 4 years ago, echoing in his mind. "You can't give me the life I deserve. Flynn, I'm not going to waste my 20s being poor. That afternoon, Rowan, ever persistent, knocked on the glass door of Emma's office building. The receptionist called up, and Emma, curious, agreed to see him. He stood when she entered the conference room, extending his hand with a practiced, confident smile. "Emma, I'm Rowan. I'm really sorry about missing our date." Emma shook his hand briefly, her gaze cool. "Flynn mentioned you. That's actually why I'm here," Rowan said, gesturing to the chairs. "Do you have a few minutes?" They sat. Rowan folded his hands on the table, his expression carefully concerned, a masterful display of feigned sincerity. "I wanted to apologize for the confusion," Rowan said, his voice smooth, "and to make sure you understand the situation with my brother." Emma's eyes narrowed, sensing the manipulation. "What situation?" "Flynn's been through a lot," Rowan said gently, his tone designed to evoke sympathy. "His ex-wife really did a number on him, left him with nothing but debt and a baby. He's a good dad, but the financial stress, the single parenting, it's been rough." "I know," Emma said, her voice flat. "He's told me." "Has he?" Rowan leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "Has he told you how much he struggles? How behind he is on everything? I just worry that someone in his position might see someone like you as a solution rather than a partner." Emma stood abruptly, her anger a cold, controlled fire. "You need to leave." Rowan raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not trying to cause problems. I just think you should ask yourself if this is real or if you're being used." After he left, Emma sat alone in her office, the silence heavy with Rowan's insidious words. She thought about the rent she had paid, the groceries, the toys. Had Flynn ever actually said he loved her? Or had she just assumed? Her own desperate desire coloring her perceptions. That evening, Flynn didn't return Emma's calls. When she drove to the apartment, the lights were off. A dark, empty space. She texted him, "Flynn, are you okay?" The reply came an hour later, a short, impersonal message. "Need some space. Sorry." Emma stared at the message, the words a cold knife in her heart. Space. That's what people said when they were ending things. 3 days passed. Flynn stopped answering his phone entirely. Emma drove by the apartment twice, her car a silent shadow in the street, but never knocked. If he wanted to end this, she would not beg, her pride a stubborn, unyielding force. At the apartment, Sophie sat at the small kitchen table, pushing food around her plate, her usual bubbly energy replaced by a quiet sadness. "Why isn't Mom Emma coming anymore?" Sophie asked for the 10th time, her voice small and mournful. Flynn's chest hurt, a dull ache of regret and self-blame. "She's busy, baby." "Did I do something wrong?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears, the innocent question a painful arrow to Flynn's heart. Flynn pulled her into his lap, holding her tight, burying his face in her soft hair. "No, never. You're perfect." "Then why did she leave?" Sophie whispered, her small voice a mirror of his own fears. "Just like Mama." Flynn held his daughter, and wanted to break. He had thought he was protecting her by pushing Emma away, shielding her from the inevitable pain of Emma's departure. But Sophie was already attached, already hurt, already experiencing the familiar ache of abandonment. He had failed her again, by the end of the week. Sophie stopped eating, her small body growing listless. She sat in daycare staring at the wall, her bright eyes dulled by sadness. At night, she asked for Emma and cried herself to sleep, her small sobs echoing in the tiny apartment. Flynn watched his daughter fade, her vibrant spirit dimming, and hated himself with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed. Emma buried herself in work, 16-hour days, back-to-back board meetings, endless investor calls, anything to not think about Flynn's silence, about Sophie calling her mom Emma, about how empty her penthouse felt now that she knew what warmth and connection could be. Sunday night. Emma's phone rang at 11:47. The sudden ring a jolt in the quiet apartment. Flynn's name flashed on the screen. She almost didn't answer, her pride and hurt warring with a deep, inexplicable fear.
"Emma." Flynn's voice shook, raw with panic. "Sophie's sick. Really sick. I don't know what to do."
Emma was already grabbing her keys, her heart pounding with a fierce, protective urgency.
"Where are you?"
"The apartment. She's burning up and she's shaking and I called an ambulance. But I'm scared and I don't know who else to call and I'm sorry.
"I'm coming,"
Emma said, her voice firm, cutting through his frantic words. 10 minutes. She made it in 7. The ambulance sat outside, lights flashing, a silent beacon in the night. EMTs were carrying Sophie out on a stretcher, her small body convulsing, her face pale and clammy. Flynn followed, his face white with terror, his gaze fixed on his daughter. Emma caught up to him at the ambulance, her hand reaching for his.
"Flynn."
He turned, and she saw everything in his eyes, fear and love and a desperate, profound relief at her presence. "She spiked to 104, Flynn said, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. "She's having a seizure. They said it's from the fever." Emma took his hand, her grip firm, a lifeline in the chaos.
"Which hospital?"
"St. Mary's," the EMT called, his voice calm amidst the urgency.
"I'll meet you there,"
Emma said, her mind already racing, formulating a plan. "At the hospital." Emma made phone calls, her voice calm and authoritative, cutting through bureaucracy. The best pediatric neurologist in the city arrived within the hour. A private room opened up, a sanctuary amidst the sterile chaos. Flynn sat outside the emergency room, his head in his hands, while Emma handled everything he could not, a silent force of efficiency and unwavering support. When the doctor finally came out, Flynn stood on shaking legs, his gaze fixed on the man in scrubs. "She's stable," Dr. Martinez said, his voice a balm. "The fever broke. It was a severe flu that escalated quickly, but she's going to be fine." Flynn's knees gave out. Emma caught him, holding him upright as he sobbed into her shoulder, a torrent of fear and relief pouring out of him. "I thought I was going to lose her," Flynn whispered, his voice thick with tears.
"She's okay,"
Emma said, her own tears falling freely, a shared release of emotion.
"She's okay."
They sat together in the quiet hospital hallway, Emma holding Flynn's hand like a lifeline, while Sophie slept peacefully in the private room. "I'm sorry," Flynn said finally, his voice hoarse, "for shutting you out. Rowan got in my head, and I started thinking maybe he was right. Maybe I was using you. Maybe you deserved better." Emma turned to face him, her eyes searching his.
"Do you love me?"
"Yes," Flynn said without hesitation, his voice strong and clear.
"God, yes. Then that's all that matters,"
Emma said, her voice firm.
"Not Rowan, not money, not what anyone else thinks."
Flynn pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "When Sophie got sick, you were the only person I wanted, the only person I trusted. That's when I knew I'd been an idiot."
"We both were,"
Emma said softly, a gentle forgiveness in her tone. The next morning, Flynn left Emma with Sophie and drove to Rowan's apartment, a cold determination in his eyes. His brother answered the door in a bathrobe, coffee in hand, his usual polished demeanor ruffled by the early hour. "What do you want?" Rowan asked, annoyance in his voice. Flynn pushed past him into the apartment, his gaze fixed on his brother. "To tell you to stay out of my life." Rowan sat down his coffee, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Flynn, I was trying to help."
"You weren't."
Flynn cut him off, his voice firm. "You were protecting your opportunity. That's all Emma ever was to you, a connection, a way to climb. Rowan's jaw worked, a vein throbbing at his temple. "So what if she was—" "That's how the world works. Flynn, you use the opportunities you get." "Did you even want to date her?" Flynn asked, a piercing directness in his gaze. "Or did Mom push you into it?" Rowan looked away. The question a silent accusation. That was answer enough. "I'm not rich like you want," Flynn said, his voice thick with emotion. "I probably never will be. But I love Emma, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure she knows it." Flynn turned to leave. At the door, he looked back at his brother. "And next time Mom asks about the family's missed opportunity, you can tell her it was never there in the first place." He left Rowan standing alone in his expensive apartment, surrounded by things that didn't matter, a hollow victory in the silence. When Flynn returned to the hospital, Sophie was awake, her small face pale and fragile in the big bed. But her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy." Sophie reached for him, her voice weak but full of love. Flynn scooped her up gently, holding her close. "Hi, baby. How do you feel?" "Tired?" Sophie said. Then she looked past him. "Where's Mom, Emma?" "Getting you juice," Emma said, walking in with a cup, a gentle smile on her face. "Here you go, sweetheart." Sophie took the juice but didn't drink. She looked between Flynn and Emma with serious, unwavering eyes. "Are you staying?" Sophie asked Emma, a profound question hanging in the air. "Or are you going to leave like before?" Emma sat on the bed and took Sophie's small hand, her gaze locked with the child's. "I'm staying, always, if that's okay with you." Sophie nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, and finally smiled, a radiant, joyful expression that illuminated the room. "Okay." Flynn's eyes burned with tears he did not let fall, the quiet strength of his love a powerful force. 2 weeks later, Flynn asked Emma to come to the bakery after closing. She arrived to find the lights dimmed, casting a soft glow, and a single table set up in the middle of the room. Candles flickered, their warm light dancing on the walls. Sophie sat at the table, already grinning, her eyes bright with anticipation. "What's this?" Emma asked, a surprised laugh escaping her lips. Flynn pulled out a chair, his movements gentle. "Sit, please." Emma sat. Flynn brought out a heart-shaped box from the kitchen and set it on the table. It looked like one of the bakery's cake boxes, but Emma sensed it was far more. "Open it," Sophie urged, bouncing in her seat, unable to contain her excitement. Emma opened the box. Inside sat a simple, delicate, silver ring, gleaming softly in the candlelight. Flynn knelt beside her chair, his gaze unwavering. "I saved for 3 months to buy that. It's not fancy. It's not what someone like you probably expects. But it's real." Emma's hand shook as she picked up the ring, its humble beauty more profound than any diamond. "If you'll have me," Flynn said, his voice steady now, a quiet strength in his tone. "I'll give you a family. I can't give you more money or a bigger house or anything you don't already have. But I can give you us, me and Sophie, every day for the rest of our lives." Emma looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly, a silent plea in her eyes. Then back at Flynn. This man who had stumbled into her life by accident and changed everything, a force of genuine love and unwavering kindness. "We've waited long enough," Emma said through her tears, her voice a joyful whisper. "Yes," Flynn said, a radiant smile transforming his tired face. He slipped the ring on her finger. Sophie cheered, her small voice a sound of pure happiness, and Emma kissed the man who had taught her that the best things in life were never planned, never bought, but simply found in unexpected moments. 6 months later. A new photograph hung on the wall at Sweet Corner. Flynn, Emma, and Sophie stood together in front of the bakery, hands linked, smiling like they had won the world, their faces radiant with a shared happiness. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The sweetest recipe, love, patience, and a little flour." A customer asked Flynn about it one afternoon while picking up a birthday cake. "That your family?" the woman asked, her gaze lingering on the photograph. Flynn looked at the photo, then at Emma, who was teaching Sophie how to frost cupcakes in the corner. Her laughter echoing softly. His wife. His daughter. His life. "Yeah," Flynn said, smiling. "I went to the wrong date. Turned out to be the right one after all." The woman laughed, a shared moment of warmth, and left with her cake. Flynn went back to his family, wrapped his arms around both of them, and knew he would never take a single moment for granted. The penthouse stayed empty most nights. Now Emma had moved into the apartment until they could find something bigger. It was cramped, and the heat still broke sometimes, and the landlord still complained. But it was full of laughter and flour and small feet running across worn floors, of Sophie's drawings covering every wall, a profound sense of belonging. Emma had spent 3 years frozen, encased in grief and control. Flynn had spent 4 years just surviving, his spirit slowly being worn down by the constant struggle. And Sophie had spent her whole short life learning what love was supposed to look like, a lesson she taught them both every single day. Now they knew. It looked like showing up even when you were scared, like staying even when it was hard, like choosing each other every single day, no matter the challenges. The heart-shaped cake box sat on their mantel, holding the receipts from that first blind date, a tangible reminder of the mistake that became their most cherished beginning.